She had nothing left but her father's notebook, a pair of steady hands, and the memory of his voice saying, "Machines never lie." For Amara Johnson, those three things were the difference between surviving another night on the streets and being swallowed whole by the city that had already forgotten her. 15 years old, black, and homeless, she was a ghost in her own hometown, unseen by the wealthy who sped past in polished cars, unheard by officials who wrote her off as a statistic, and underestimated by everyone who glanced at her torn jacket and hollow cheeks. But what no one knew, what not even the city's most powerful billionaire had the faintest clue about, was that this invisible girl was about to stand in the middle of a storm of money, power, and sabotage. And with only 5 words, she would change everything. The rain that night didn't fall gently. It attacked, hurling itself against hangar roofs and bouncing in angry splashes off the concrete runway. Somewhere beyond the storm, commercial flights roared into the sky, but here, in a private corner of the airport, the most expensive jet in the state sat wounded. A Gulfstream G700. Price tag, $70 million. Owned by Richard Hawthorne, a man so wealthy that entire boardrooms shifted course depending on the tilt of his mood. But tonight, his pride and joy, his polished white jet, was grounded. Its left engine had coughed, failed, and refused to start again. And for hours, a hand-picked team of world-class engineers had circled it like priests before a dying god, running diagnostics and shaking their heads in quiet defeat. Something was wrong with the machine. Something none of them could find. And time was bleeding away. Every lost hour meant Hawthorne hemorrhaged money, influence, and reputation. The Tokyo merger he had flown halfway across the world to close. Delayed. The deal worth nearly $50 million. Already slipping through his fingers. For a man whose empire was built on control, this failure was more than a nuisance. It was humiliation. Amara wasn't supposed to be there. She had ducked into the hangar only to escape the storm, her army jacket soaked through, shoes squelching with each step. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, 3 days without a proper meal, and exhaustion pulled her shoulders down. She wasn't thinking about jets, billionaires, or sabotage. She was thinking about finding a corner to curl up in, out of the rain, where security guards wouldn't notice her. But then she saw the engine. Even from 30 feet away, half hidden behind a cart of tools, Amara's eyes locked on the exposed turbine like it was a puzzle meant for her alone. To anyone else, the guts of that engine were a tangle of titanium, steel, and wires. To Amara, they sang. She had grown up in hangars, perched on her father's shoulders, watching him coax life back into tired machines. Where others saw confusion, she saw patterns. Where others saw impossibility, she saw music waiting to be played in harmony again. And as her gaze sharpened, her pulse quickened. They had missed it. The engineers, with their laptops and polished degrees, had overlooked something small but deliberate. A cut too clean to be accident. A misalignment too precise to be chance. Her father's voice whispered in her mind, "Machines never lie. But people? People will try to make them." Amara's throat tightened. This wasn't just a broken jet. This was sabotage. And sabotage meant danger. If Hawthorne's plane went back into the air like this, it wouldn't just fail, it would burn. And when it burned, so would the man who owned it. No one saw her step out from behind the tool cart. No one noticed the girl with dripping braids and trembling hands take a single breath and summon all the courage she had left. The engineers muttered, the billionaire barked, the storm raged outside. But Amara's voice cut through it, steady and sharp. "If you permit, I will fix it." For a heartbeat, the hangar went silent. Then the laughter started. Nervous. Disbelieving. Cruel. A homeless girl fixing a $70 million jet? Ridiculous. Impossible. And yet, Richard Hawthorne turned. His gray eyes narrowed. His jaw clenched. Because in Amara's eyes he saw something no one else in that room had given him all night. Not excuses. Not confusion. Certainty. What no one knew, what no one could even imagine, was that this soaked, starving, invisible girl was the only person in that hangar who truly understood what was wrong with the machine. And before the storm was over, before the night ended, she would expose betrayal, uncover sabotage, and prove her worth in a way that shook empires. But it all began with those 5 words. If you permit, I will fix it. The storm outside beat down like 1,000 angry fists on the roof of the private hangar. Every crash of thunder rattled the steel beams, but inside the cavernous space it was another kind of storm entirely, one made of power, pride, and desperation. Richard Hawthorne's black Bentley slid to a stop just outside the hangar doors. A driver leapt out, umbrella snapping open against the rain, as the billionaire emerged. Every detail of him spoke of money, the hand-stitched Italian leather shoes clicking against wet concrete, the charcoal suit tailored so precisely it seemed woven onto his body, the Patek Philippe gleaming at his wrist. His presence turned heads the way lightning does, not because it was rare, but because you knew damage could follow in its wake. Where is it? Richard barked, not at the storm but at the assistant scurrying beside him with a tablet clutched like a shield. Bay 3, Mr. Hawthorne, the man stammered. The engineers arrived 2 hours ago. The doors yawned wider and Richard strode inside. The Gulfstream G700 sat like a grounded bird in the center of the hangar. White paint gleamed under fluorescent lights, but the left engine's exposed panels told a different story, one of failure, weakness, maybe betrayal. Around it, 6 engineers in crisp coveralls moved with all the urgency of surgeons losing a patient on the table. Amara shrank deeper into the shadows near a stack of tool cabinets. From here she could see it all, the billionaire's fury, the engineers' nervous hands, the crowd of staff and pilots gathering at a cautious distance. To them, this was spectacle. To her, it was shelter. She hadn't meant to intrude. The warmth of the hangar had drawn her like a moth to flame, but now she was caught in the open. Still, her eyes couldn't leave the engine. Even from her hiding spot, she could see what the others couldn't. She could see the subtle wrongness in the way metal lined up, the small misstep in harmony. Her father used to say an engine was like a choir, every part had to sing in tune. And right now, this one was screaming. Richard's voice cracked across the hangar. Report. The lead engineer, flown in at staggering expense, stepped forward. His hands fidgeted with his glasses. Sir, we've run every diagnostic. The turbine assembly shows signs of mechanical failure, but the cause remains elusive. Elusive? Richard's whisper was more dangerous than a shout. I pay you $300,000 a year to make problems vanish, not to tell me they're elusive. He turned to the others. You, MIT. You, Stanford. You, Caltech. I see degrees worth more than small nations standing around my broken plane doing nothing. Whispers rippled through the onlookers. Someone muttered about a missed merger. Another whispered about a $50 million deal slipping away. Someone else mentioned a mechanic Richard had fired last year for using the wrong oil. The atmosphere thickened. Not just money was at stake. Reputation was. Power was. And in the far corner, half hidden and dripping wet, one starving girl realized she was staring at the opening scene of a war she wasn't supposed to witness. For 3 days Amara had eaten nothing but half a sandwich pulled from a deli dumpster. Her jacket, too big, torn at the seams, sagged from the weight of water. Her hair, once braided with care by loving hands, now clung in tangled knots to her face. She pressed herself against the wall, willing herself invisible. But invisibility could only last so long. Her eyes betrayed her. They kept drifting to the engine, to the way the bearing housing caught the light. Something was wrong. She could see it, even from here. And once she saw it, she couldn't unsee it. The storm outside grew louder, but inside the hangar all noise collapsed into the billionaire's fury. 3 days. Richard spat when an engineer suggested ordering parts from the manufacturer. Do you know what 3 days costs me? Do you? His voice thundered against the steel walls. His empire thrived on control, and this failure threatened to unravel it all. Amara's lips moved silently. Words her father had drilled into her when she was still a child perched on his workbench: compressor clearance, bearing race alignment, thermal expansion coefficient. She shouldn't have spoken them out loud. She knew that. But hunger, exhaustion, and certainty collided inside her chest. And then one of the younger mechanics noticed her. "Hey! What's that kid doing here?" 50 pairs of eyes turned. The invisible girl was visible now. For a heartbeat Amara froze. She could run back into the storm. She could shrink, apologize, beg. But something inside her, something her father had planted long ago, made her stand taller instead. The engineers sneered. The crowd murmured. A mechanic laughed. "What's a homeless kid gonna do? Fix a jet engine?" Richard's gaze cut into her like a blade. Cold. Unforgiving. Curious. And still, she stepped forward. Rainwater pooled beneath her shoes. Her voice, when it came, was steadier than she felt. "Your N2 rotor isn't tracking true," she said. "The high-pressure turbine shaft has a lateral displacement. Probably from thermal stress during your last inspection." The hangar fell silent. Richard turned back slowly. "What did you say?" Amara swallowed. Her hands trembled, but her words did not. "If you permit, I will fix it." The laughter that followed was thunderous. Engineers doubled over. Mechanics slapped their knees. Even a few business associates chuckled at the absurdity. But Richard Hawthorne did not laugh. He studied her, not like she was a trespasser, but like she was a puzzle. And in her eyes he saw the same quiet certainty he had once carried himself, years ago, when no one believed in him either. And just before the story surges forward. Quick pause before we continue, let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. And if stories of underdogs beating impossible odds speak to you, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next one. Then back to the tension. This was no longer about shelter from the storm. This was about something much bigger. Amara Johnson, 15, homeless, dismissed by everyone, had just challenged the most powerful man in the room. And though the world laughed at her, though the engineers scoffed and security reached for radios, one truth hung in the air like the storm itself. She might be the only one who could save them all. The silence after Amara's words was heavy, like the pause between lightning and thunder. "If you permit, I will fix it." Then the storm broke. Laughter burst across the hangar. Engineers howled, mechanics smirked, even some of the Billionaire's guests chuckled with disbelief. One of them wiped tears from his eyes. "This is rich," he sneered. Richard Hawthorne's $1 million jet, his army of engineers stumped, and a homeless girl thinks she can solve it. The sound of ridicule echoed louder than the rain outside. But Richard Hawthorne didn't laugh. His gray eyes narrowed as he studied the dripping teenager who dared to speak with certainty where his best minds had failed. Her clothes were rags. Her shoes were soaked. Her hands trembled at her sides. And yet, her voice had carried steel. "You know about jet engines?" he asked finally, his tone sharp but curious. Amara's gaze didn't waver. "I know about this one. A Rolls-Royce BR 725. Thrust rating 16,900. 10-stage high-pressure compressor. Your problem isn't broken parts. It's alignment." The lead engineer, Dr. Foster, scoffed audibly. "Mr. Hawthorne, surely you're not entertaining. How do you know this?" Richard cut him off. Amara's jaw tightened. "Does it matter if I can fix it?" Her words hung in the air, dangerous and defiant. Security moved closer, called by a nod from one of the engineers. One of them barked, "She's trespassing. Let's get her out." But Richard raised a hand, halting them. Everything matters, he said slowly. But right now, what matters most is that you're the first person in 6 hours to offer a diagnosis instead of excuses. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Sir, with respect, Dr. Foster began again, but Richard cut him off a second time. Respect is earned, Foster. Right now, this girl has given me more to think about than you have. The sound of heels clicked across the hangar floor. Richard's wife, Victoria, had arrived. Diamonds dripped from her neck, each one worth more than the soaked girl's entire life. At her side, their teenage son Preston smirked in a blazer so pristine it looked ironed onto him. Richard, Victoria said, her voice sharp as glass, you cannot be serious. You're considering letting a vagrant child tinker with a $70 million aircraft? Her son snorted. Dad, this is embarrassing. What will people say? Richard's eyes hardened. They'll say I get results while others make excuses. Amara's pulse thundered. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to escape the stares burning holes in her skin. But hunger, exhaustion, and something fiercer kept her feet planted. If I'm wrong, she said suddenly, surprising even herself, I'll leave right now. If I'm right, you let me finish the job. The murmurs swelled. Never before had anyone, let alone a homeless girl, bargained with Richard Hawthorne. This is insane, Foster snapped. We're talking liability. We're talking certification. Richard cut him off again. We're talking about my jet. My rules. He turned back to Amara. You have one chance. Before anyone could react further, another voice slithered into the hangar. Well, drawled a silver-haired man descending from the observation balcony. Richard Hawthorne, reduced to negotiating with children. My, how the mighty fall. Grant Ellison. Richard's longtime rival. His smile was warm, his eyes cold. I couldn't help but overhear, Ellison said, spreading his hands innocently. If you're in need of competent assistance, Richard, I'd be happy to lend you my team. No need to risk your precious aircraft on theatrics. The implication was clear. If Richard allowed Amara to touch the jet and she failed, Ellison would own the narrative. If she succeeded, Ellison would claim he had been ready to help all along. Richard's jaw tightened. Convenient that you're here, Grant. Ellison's smile widened. I was in the neighborhood. What are friends for? Amara watched them carefully. On the streets, she had learned to read predators. Ellison wasn't just circling out of curiosity. He smelled blood. And in the midst of that silent duel between billionaires, she clutched her father's notebook beneath her jacket. Its pages were soaked, but the words inside were indelible. Equations, sketches, wisdom scribbled in grease pencil, her inheritance, her lifeline. Machines never lie. She lifted her chin. I need tools, she said. Number 12 and 14 wrenches. A torque wrench calibrated to inch-pounds, not foot. A dental mirror. And a frequency harmonic analyzer, if you have one. The mechanics erupted in laughter again. A dental mirror? What is this, a dentist's office? No, Amara replied calmly, but you'll need to see the back of the coupling housing without tearing the whole thing apart. Unless you'd like to waste another 6 hours. Her voice was calm, steady. And that was when Richard did something that silenced the room. He nodded. Get her what she needs. Gasps rippled through the hangar. Richard, this is madness. Victoria snapped. This girl could destroy everything. Richard turned on her, his voice low and dangerous. The only thing being destroyed tonight is time. And I don't intend to lose any more of it. For Amara, the moment felt surreal. 1 minute, she had been invisible. The next, all eyes were on her. Mocking, skeptical, hostile, but on her. She reached into her jacket and pulled out the notebook. Its cover was stained, its pages crumpled. She laid it open on a tool cart and flipped to a diagram her father had once drawn by hand. "This engine doesn't have a parts problem," she said firmly, tracing the sketch. "It has a balance problem. And if you don't fix it now, the next time this plane takes off will be its last." The hangar went silent again. This was no longer laughter. This was no longer mockery. This was the beginning of war. The tools arrived reluctantly, tossed onto a cart by a mechanic muttering under his breath about babysitting experiments. Amara ignored the snickers. She picked up the dental mirror, crouched by the exposed engine, and slipped the mirror deep into a gap no one else had bothered to check. Her heart hammered, but her hands were steady. "There," she whispered. The lead engineer rolled his eyes. "There what?" Amara tilted the mirror so the overhead lights reflected deep inside. "Your compressor clearance is off. The turbine shaft isn't seated true, you can see the scoring if you look. The misalignment will cause a harmonic imbalance. Push the engine, and it will fail catastrophically." For a moment, silence. Then one mechanic bent down, peered through the mirror, and paled. She's right." Murmurs rippled through the hangar. Richard's gaze sharpened. The laughter faded into uneasy whispers. But Foster, the lead engineer, wasn't ready to surrender. "Coincidence," he snapped. She guessed. Amara held up her notebook. Pages filled with her father's sketches fluttered under the hangar fans. "Machines don't lie," she said softly. "Your people just don't listen." Mini cliffhanger, Foster storms off to fetch diagnostic data, determined to prove her wrong. While Foster pulls data, Amara continues inspecting. Her fingers brush against the fuel line, and freeze. A thin, deliberate scratch runs its length. Not wear. Not accident. Sabotage. Her stomach drops. She looks up at Richard. Someone did this on purpose. Gasps. Victoria laughs bitterly. Oh, now she's spinning conspiracy theories. Next she'll claim aliens cut the fuel line. But Amara's certainty doesn't waver. She remembers her father's words the day he lost his job after speaking up about unsafe practices. When money's at stake, people will always choose silence over truth. She flips to another page in her notebook, a drawing of stress fractures. This cut is too clean. If this plane flew, it would have ruptured midair. That's not failure. That's murder. The hangar explodes in noise. Security radios crackle. Richard's expression darkens. Who's responsible? Ellison smiles from the sidelines, hands raised innocently. Surely you're not accusing your own people, Richard. Mini cliffhanger, Amara realizes she has uncovered not just a fault, but an enemy inside the hangar. Just as tension peaks, flashing lights appear outside the hangar. Airport police. Behind them, a woman from Child Services. "Richard Hawthorne," she calls, striding in with a clipboard. "We received reports of a minor trespassing. She needs to be taken into custody immediately." Amara's chest seizes. If they take her now, she'll never finish the repair. The officer reaches for her arm. Richard blocks him. "She's under my protection tonight." The Child Services worker scoffs. "She's a homeless minor, Mr. Hawthorne. Do you even understand the liability?" Amara blurts out, "If you stop me, the jet burns. You, him, everyone in it." All eyes swing to her. Her notebook shakes in her hands. For a moment, she looks like a terrified child. But her voice rings with truth. Richard hesitates. Then, to the police, she stays. Mini cliffhanger, the officers back down, but the tension leaves Amara shaken. Flashback, her father being escorted out of his job in handcuffs for whistleblowing. Lesson, truth makes enemies. Not everyone mocks her. One young mechanic, Diego, slips her a torque wrench and whispers, "I think you're right. I saw stress markers earlier but didn't dare say anything." Amara nods gratefully. For the first time, she's not completely alone. Meanwhile, Preston, the billionaire's teenage son, hovers nearby. At first smirking, but slowly his expression shifts. He watches her steady hands, her focus, her courage under ridicule. He whispers to his father, "She's kind of amazing." Richard says nothing, but the corner of his mouth twitches. As Amara works, she explains the harmonics of rotating machinery. Her words weave both technical brilliance and poetic metaphor, comparing the engine's vibrations to a heartbeat. The crowd quiets. For a moment, they are captivated. Mini cliffhanger, she fixes one alignment, powers the auxiliary unit, the engine coughs to life, then dies instantly. Someone sabotaged another system. The hangar descends into chaos. Another fault discovered, a deliberate obstruction placed in the fuel control unit. Too sophisticated for an accident. Amara realizes, this isn't sabotage by one person. It's a conspiracy. FBI agents arrive, summoned quietly by Richard. They swarm the hangar, questioning staff. One mechanic cracks under pressure, admitting he was bribed to interfere with the jet. But who bribed him? His shaking eyes flick to Ellison. The rival billionaire smiles thinly, denying everything. Amara steps forward, her notebook in hand. It doesn't matter who ordered it. Right now, if I don't fix the harmonic imbalance, this jet never flies again. Security detains the saboteur. FBI pulls Richard aside. But Richard points at Amara, she finishes the job. No one else touches it. Flashback, Amara at her father's funeral, gripping the notebook, vowing to keep his legacy alive. The storm outside peaks, lightning flashing against the hangar's massive windows. Time is running out. Mini cliffhanger, Amara kneels by the engine, whispering to herself. One last chance. If I fail, everything burns. The hangar lights buzzed as if the storm outside had seeped into the walls. Every face, billionaire, engineers, mechanics, FBI, Victoria with her diamond glare, Ellison with his smug smile, watched the soaked teenager kneeling before the wounded jet. Amara's fingers hovered over the final torque adjustment. Her notebook lay open on the cart beside her, pages spotted with rain and grease, but the sketches seemed to glow under the harsh lights. Her father's handwriting stared back. Machines never lie. Trust what they tell you. She drew in a shaky breath. This was it. Auxiliary power online, Diego, the young mechanic, announced. His voice cracked but held steady. Richard Hawthorne stood with arms folded, his expression unreadable. But his silence was permission. Amara tightened the last bolt. Her voice barely carried. Start the sequence. Engines hummed. The hangar vibrated. For 3 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then the left turbine coughed once. Twice. The sound echoed like a dying heartbeat. Engineers shook their heads. Victoria smirked. Ellison folded his arms. And then, a roar. The engine came alive with a thunder that shook the steel rafters. Gauges flickered, stabilized, then climbed. Numbers glowed green across the diagnostic screens. Amara staggered back, grease on her cheeks, hair plastered to her forehead. But her eyes burned bright. It's balanced, she whispered. The crowd gasped. Some clapped hesitantly. Preston grinned. Diego whooped. But the loudest sound wasn't applause. It was the engine itself, steady, flawless, singing the harmony Amara had promised. Foster, the lead engineer, turned pale. Impossible, he muttered. This, she couldn't. Richard's gaze snapped to him. She did. And you didn't. The humiliation that had weighed on Amara for years flipped in a heartbeat. Where once people looked through her, now they stared. Where once she was dismissed, now she was undeniable. Victoria hissed, "This is reckless. A child." But Richard silenced her with a raised hand. His voice carried over the roar of the engine. "Enough." He stepped forward, toward Amara. For the first time, the billionaire who owned empires looked not down at her, but level. "You saved my jet," he said. "You may have saved me." Amara's throat tightened. She thought of her father, standing over a rusted carburetor years ago, grease on his hands, pride in his eyes. Machines never lie. She blinked hard. The words escaped her lips in a whisper, not meant for anyone else. "Daddy, I did it." Applause swelled in the hangar. Even some of the engineers who had mocked her now clapped reluctantly. Diego clapped hardest, grinning ear to ear. Preston stepped forward and, for the first time in his privileged life, looked impressed by someone outside his world. Ellison's smile, however, faltered. His plans had unraveled in front of him, undone by a girl no one had expected. He muttered something to an aide and slipped toward the exit, eyes already calculating his next move. But the FBI intercepted him. Not so fast. Mini-twist inside climax. As the engine purred, one agent revealed evidence tying Ellison's company to the sabotage. Gasps erupted again. Ellison sneered at Amara. "This isn't over." She didn't flinch. "No," she said softly, "it's just beginning." Richard turned to the crowd. His voice boomed. "This girl has done what none of you could. Remember her name. Amara Johnson." Her knees nearly buckled. For years, she had been invisible. Tonight, she was undeniable. The roar of the engine slowly wound down, humming into silence as the auxiliary power cycled off. For a long moment, the hangar was quiet except for the steady drip of rainwater off Amara's jacket onto the concrete floor. Then came the applause. It began with Diego, clapping furiously despite grease-stained hands. Preston followed, hesitant at first, then louder. One by one, the room of doubters, mechanics, engineers, even executives, joined in. The sound echoed against steel walls, filling the cavernous space with something Amara had never heard directed at her before, respect. Her cheeks burned. She didn't know where to look. For years, she had been the shadow in alleys, the girl people crossed the street to avoid. And now, under the glare of floodlights, they were clapping for her. Richard Hawthorne stepped forward. The billionaire who had once barked at men with doctorates now lowered his voice, steady and deliberate. "You saved my jet," he said. "But more than that, you exposed betrayal in my own house." He extended a hand. The same hand that had signed billion-dollar contracts, now offered to a drenched teenager who owned nothing but a notebook. Amara hesitated. She remembered nights of hunger, of people brushing past her as if she were invisible. To take his hand meant stepping into a world that had never welcomed her. Her father's words whispered again in her mind, "Machines never lie. But people, they're harder." Slowly, she placed her hand in his. The applause swelled. Victoria's voice sliced through the moment. "Richard, this is absurd. She's a child. She's homeless. What will the press say when they find out you've hired some street girl to?" "Enough, Victoria," Richard snapped. For once, his tone silenced even her. He turned back to Amara. "You're no longer invisible. From tonight on, you have a place here. An apprenticeship, if you'll take it. And protection. No one lays a hand on you again." Amara's breath caught. Protection. A place. Word she hadn't dared dream of hearing. Preston stepped forward, awkward but sincere. Maybe you could teach me sometime. Engines, I mean." Amara blinked. The billionaire's son, the boy who had sneered earlier, now looked at her with something close to admiration. Maybe, she said softly. The FBI agents hauled away the mechanic who had confessed to sabotage. Ellison's shadow still lingered in their minds, but for tonight, the immediate danger was gone. Richard placed a hand on Amara's shoulder. You've done more than fix an engine. You've reminded me what it means to fight when the world tells you you can't. Her throat tightened. She looked down at the battered notebook still clutched in her hand. Pages warped by rain, corners bent from years of wear. This had been her shield, her inheritance, her proof that she mattered. Now, in this gleaming hangar filled with power and wealth, it was her credential. She pressed it to her chest, eyes stinging. It was my father's, she said quietly. Everything I know came from him. Richard nodded. Then we'll honor him too. Outside, the storm was breaking. The thunder softened, the rain eased, and pale light began to push through ragged clouds. For the first time in days, the night didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a beginning. Amara stepped toward the hangar doors. She looked back at the jet one last time. Where others saw a machine, she saw a mirror. Broken, sabotaged, dismissed, but alive again. Just like her. For a moment, she closed her eyes and let the warmth of the lights soak into her skin. She wasn't just the girl in the shadows anymore. She had fixed what no one else could. And in doing so, she had begun to fix herself. The applause still echoed in the hangar when the FBI agent returned, phone pressed to his ear, expression grim. He leaned close to Richard and whispered, but Amara caught enough to feel the hairs rise on her arms. This wasn't just one mechanic. The order came from higher up. Your rival isn't working alone. Richard's jaw clenched. He glanced at Amara, then back to the agent. How high are we talking? The agent's silence was answer enough. Ellison, still detained, sneered across the room. You think this ends with me? I'm a pebble in the river, Richard. Take me away, and the current still flows. The words slithered into Amara's ears. She tightened her grip on her father's notebook. Richard turned to her, voice low. Tonight you saved a jet. Tomorrow, we may be fighting for far more. Amara's pulse quickened. She had spent years running from shadows. Now she was being invited to step into the heart of one. She looked back at the jet. Its polished surface reflected her face, tired, bruised by life, but unbroken. In its gleam, she didn't see the invisible girl anymore. She saw someone dangerous. Someone necessary. Her father's words whispered again, machines never lie. But people did. And somewhere beyond these walls, liars were already plotting their next move. As the FBI led Ellison away, thunder rolled faintly in the distance, not gone, only retreating. Amara closed her notebook, tucked it under her arm, and whispered to herself, then let them come. The storm might have ended, but another was already forming. And this time, she would be ready.